President-elect Donald Trump has recently expressed concerns over China's alleged influence in the Panama Canal, suggesting that the United States should consider reclaiming control over this strategic waterway. He criticized Panama for imposing exorbitant fees on American vessels and insinuated that the canal might be falling into the wrong hands, referencing China. To the officials of Panama, please be guided accordingly. However, the president of Panama responded swiftly, stating, "As president, I want to express precisely that every square meter of the Panama Canal and its adjacent area belongs to Panama and will continue to be." With these actions, Trump risks reigniting a decades-long dispute between the two nations. The U.S. has significant economic and geopolitical interests in the canal, as it was the one to build it. However, Panama now holds sovereignty over the canal under international law, following a 1977 treaty and its transfer in 1999. Recently, Panama celebrated the 25th anniversary of the canal's handover. What complicates this situation further is China's growing influence in Panama. China has been strengthening its economic and political ties with the Panamanian government, raising concerns in the U.S. According to the treaty that governs the canal's transfer, no other nations are permitted to build military installations in Panama or operate the canal. Trump claims that China's involvement violates this agreement, and it's one of the primary reasons for his push to reclaim the canal. To understand the current conflict, we need to examine the history of the Panama Canal. The idea of a canal in Panama dates back to the 16th century, when people recognized the strategic potential of a waterway connecting the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. The narrow strip of land dividing the Caribbean Sea in the north and the Pacific Ocean in the south presented an ideal location. Economically, the demand for such a canal grew with the rise of global trade networks. Colonial powers, particularly Spain, sought to connect their territories more efficiently. However, carving a canal through Panama was a monumental challenge due to its terrain, elevation, and dense forests. In the 16th century, the technology simply didn't exist to make this project feasible. By the 19th century, the European powers had lost control of the region, and the United States emerged as a dominant force. The need for a canal became apparent as the U.S. expanded. A canal in Panama would shorten the sea route between the U.S. east and west coasts by 8,000 nautical miles, 15,000 kilometers. The U.S. initially opted for a railway, which opened in 1855 near the site of the current canal. This Panama Railroad allowed goods to be transported between ships on either side of the isthmus, saving months of travel. Despite its success, the idea of a canal remained unfulfilled. In the 19th century, attention shifted to Nicaragua as a potential canal site. Nicaragua had a large lake, Lake Nicaragua, and a connecting river, the San Juan River, which seemed to offer a simpler solution. The terrain in Nicaragua was less elevated and easier to work with. However, political instability in Nicaragua and British influence in the region stalled the project. Meanwhile, in 1881, French engineers and investors, inspired by the success of the Suez Canal, attempted to build a canal in Panama. They raised significant funds but underestimated the challenges of Panama's tropical environment. Workers faced diseases like yellow fever and malaria, heavy rainfall, and treacherous terrain. The project failed in 1889, leaving behind financial ruin and over 22,000 worker deaths. By the early 20th century, the United States recognized the strategic importance of the Panama Canal. Lobbyists convinced President Theodore Roosevelt to abandon the Nicaragua plan and focus on Panama. In 1902, the U.S. purchased the French assets through the Spooner Act, intending to restart construction. Negotiations with Colombia, which controlled Panama at the time, failed when Colombia rejected the U.S. offer to lease the canal in perpetuity for $10 million upfront and $250,000 annually. Frustrated, Roosevelt supported Panama's independence movement. In 1903, rebels declared Panama's independence, aided by U.S. intervention. 3 days later, the U.S. recognized Panama as an independent nation, becoming the first country to do so. Panama then granted the U.S. control over the canal zone. Construction resumed under U.S. leadership, using a more sophisticated design involving an artificial lake and a lock system to lift ships. By 1914, the Panama Canal was completed, revolutionizing global trade and securing the U.S.'s influence in the region. In 1977, the U.S. signed a treaty with Panama agreeing to transfer control of the canal by 1999. Since then, Panama has managed the canal under international law, celebrating its sovereignty. However, Trump's recent statements signal a potential challenge to this agreement. China's growing influence in Panama has heightened tensions. Beijing's investments in Panamanian infrastructure and its political ties with the government have alarmed U.S. officials. According to the treaty, no foreign nation can operate the canal or establish military installations in Panama. Trump views China's involvement as a treaty violation and an economic threat. Trump's plan to reclaim the canal hinges on its economic and strategic value. The canal facilitates global trade, reducing shipping times and costs for goods moving between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. As global competition intensifies, control over such a crucial trade route is more important than ever. The Panama Canal remains vital for U.S. national security and global trade. Trump argues that China's influence threatens the canal's neutrality and compromises its strategic significance. However, reclaiming the canal would be legally and diplomatically complex, potentially violating international law and damaging U.S.-Panama relations. Panama's president has firmly rejected Trump's proposal, asserting the nation's sovereignty over the canal. Meanwhile, Trump's rhetoric risks escalating tensions with both Panama and China, further complicating the situation. The Panama Canal represents a key geopolitical asset with profound economic and strategic importance. While Trump's proposal to reclaim the canal taps into its historical ties with the U.S., it faces significant legal, diplomatic, and practical challenges. The conflict underscores the evolving dynamics of global power and the growing influence of China in regions traditionally dominated by the U.S. Roosevelt also sent the U.S. Navy to Panama to ensure Colombia wouldn't attempt to retake the territory. The new Panamanian authorities quickly signed a deal with the U.S., granting Washington a lease for a 10-mile wide and 50-mile long canal zone. However, securing the lease was the easy part. Construction was another story. The project turned out to be as challenging as the French had experienced a few years earlier. After years of debate, Roosevelt approved the plan proposed by engineer John Frank Stevens, which resembled the earlier French proposal. It included the construction of an artificial lake and a lock system. The U.S. built the Gatun Dam, a massive structure that took 6 years to complete. By damming the northern part of the Chagres River, the dam created Gatun Lake, one of the largest artificial lakes in the world, covering 164 square miles, 425 square kilometers. The U.S. also constructed 6 lock systems, 3 in the north and 3 in the south. While this was the most complex part of the project, it wasn't the hardest. A significant portion of the Culebra Cut still required excavation, which proved extremely challenging. In total, 96 million cubic yards, 73 million cubic meters, of material had to be removed. The U.S. used modern technologies like dynamite, steam shovels, and drill machines, but progress was slow. Landslides, such as the infamous Cucaracha slide of 1907, killed many workers and set the project back. American engineers learned from their mistakes and those of the French. They brought in medical experts to combat tropical diseases like malaria and yellow fever. Despite these efforts, nearly 6,000 workers died during the project. Tragic, but far fewer than in the previous French attempt. After 10 years of work, the Panama Canal was completed in 1914, widely regarded as one of the greatest engineering feats in history. Over the decades, the Panama Canal became one of the world's most important waterways, driving economic growth in the U.S., Asia, and Europe. During World War I and World War II, it allowed the U.S. and its allies to move ships, troops, and equipment efficiently. While the canal benefited global trade, Panamanians felt the deal was deeply unfair. Their country was effectively split in half by a foreign-controlled colony. The U.S. responded to these criticisms with treaties in 1936 and 1955, granting Panama additional lands and waters, increasing wages for local workers, and giving Panama control over the ports of Colón and Panama City. However, these concessions weren't enough. Inspired by global anti-colonial movements, Panama demanded full sovereignty over the canal. Years of debate culminated in the 1977 Panama Canal Treaty, signed by U.S. President Jimmy Carter. This historic agreement gave Panama full sovereignty over the canal and canal zone after a 20-year transition period. The treaty included a neutrality clause ensuring equal access to the canal for all nations, with priority given to U.S. and Panamanian naval vessels during wartime. It also prohibited other nations from building military installations or operating the canal. Carter's decision made him popular in Panama, and he is still remembered fondly there. After his recent passing, Panama's president praised Carter for making the country truly sovereign. Despite the treaty, tensions have persisted. China's growing influence in Panama has become a significant concern for the U.S. Beijing's investments in Panamanian infrastructure and closer ties with the government have raised alarms. Trump argues that China's involvement violates the treaty and compromises the canal's neutrality. Trump also believes Panama has failed to operate the canal efficiently and fairly. Rising tariffs have angered American businesses, which account for 74% of canal traffic. In 2022, the average toll was around $54,000, but larger vessels like tankers and gas carriers paid significantly more, up to $500,000 or more. In some cases, transit slots were auctioned, with one record-setting fee of $4 million in 2023. Panama has justified the rising costs by citing water shortages caused by droughts, which have limited the number of available transit slots. However, critics argue that the droughts are not severe enough to warrant such extreme measures and accuse Panama of mismanagement. Since the treaty was signed, U.S.-Panama relations have experienced significant events. In the 1980s, Panama was ruled by a military dictatorship under General Manuel Noriega. Initially a U.S. ally, Noriega fell out of favor due to his involvement in drug trafficking and authoritarian rule. Tensions escalated when Noriega's forces killed a U.S. Marine in 1989. This incident prompted the U.S. to launch Operation Just Cause, the largest military action since the Vietnam War. Over 27,000 U.S. soldiers and 300 aircraft overwhelmed Panama's military, toppling Noriega's regime in less than 6 weeks. Although the invasion caused significant destruction and civilian casualties, it ended Panama's dictatorship and established a functioning democracy. Panama subsequently abolished its military, relying on civilian forces for internal and border security. The U.S. remains a guarantor of Panama's defense, ensuring its stability. Panama's economy has thrived in recent decades, partly due to canal revenues. The country has operated the canal, adding a new lane with larger locks to accommodate bigger ships. However, Trump believes Panama's rising tolls and China's involvement violate the spirit of the 1977 treaty. Trump has openly criticized the 1977 treaty, calling it terrible, and claiming it contributed to Jimmy Carter's re-election loss. He argues that Panama has violated the treaty by allowing Chinese influence and charging excessive tariffs. Trump has said, "They laugh at us because they think we're stupid. But we're not stupid anymore." He has hinted at renegotiating or taking back control of the canal, citing its importance to U.S. national security and trade. With 40% of U.S. container traffic passing through the canal, Trump sees it as a critical asset. However, reclaiming the canal would likely violate international law and damage U.S.-Panama relations. The Panama Canal remains a vital artery for global trade and U.S. economic interests. While Trump's push to reclaim the canal highlights its strategic importance, such a move would face significant legal, diplomatic, and practical challenges. As Panama navigates its future, balancing its sovereignty with global pressures will be key. We can't rule out a profit incentive behind Panama's management of the canal, as it appears the country may be artificially limiting transit slots to increase toll prices. This theory aligns with the numbers. In 2024, The Panama Canal generated $5 billion in revenue, with over 60% of that as profit. According to the financial statements of the Panama Canal Authority, $2.5 billion of this profit went directly to the national treasury, essentially funding the government. Another $257 million was transferred indirectly through taxes and fees. For a country with a GDP of $83 billion, this is a substantial source of income. The canal is one of Panama's biggest revenue streams. However, to Trump's dismay, much of this profit originates from the United States, the canal's largest customer. Trump has called this situation a complete ripoff and vowed to end it. He's particularly critical of Panama's increasing profit margins, which come at the expense of American shipping companies. According to Trump, this is not what Jimmy Carter intended when the canal was handed over to Panama. Beyond economic interests, the canal is crucial for U.S. national security. The U.S. Navy relies on the canal to transfer ships between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, particularly during conflicts. For example, in a hypothetical war in East Asia, canal access could mean the difference between victory and defeat. During World War II, the canal was instrumental in allowing the U.S. to operate effectively in both Europe and Asia. Trump has expressed frustration that Panama charges significant fees for U.S. military vessels, which he finds unacceptable. "The Panama Canal was built for our military," he remarked, implying the U.S. should receive privileged access. Adding to Trump's concerns is China's growing involvement in Panama, which he views as a direct threat to U.S. interests. China has used its Belt and Road Initiative to deepen economic and political ties with Panama. In 2017, Panama was one of the first countries to join the initiative, with promises of infrastructure investments, including bridges, a rail line, commercial ports, and a cruise terminal. While some projects were canceled, one notable venture stands out: a $900 million container port at Margarita Island near the canal's Atlantic entrance. The port is being developed by Chinese companies, including Landbridge Group, which has ties to the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, and the People's Liberation Army, PLA. The involvement of Chinese companies in such a strategic location is a major concern for the U.S. While these companies claim to be private, their connections to the CCP and PLA suggest otherwise. For example, Landbridge Group reportedly maintains a militia linked to the PLA. If Chinese entities gain significant control over key facilities at the Panama Canal, it could pose a serious national security risk to U.S. vessels and companies, particularly during times of conflict. Two other ports at the canal, Balboa on the Pacific side and Cristobal on the Atlantic side, are managed by Hutchison Ports, a Hong Kong-based company. While Hong Kong was once considered politically independent from mainland China, recent developments have brought the city increasingly under CCP influence. There is growing concern that Hutchison Ports could fall in line with Beijing's interests, further compromising U.S. security. Trump has been vocal about these concerns, stating, "The Panama Canal is being operated by China. We gave the Panama Canal to Panama. We didn't give it to China. They've abused that gift." While there is no public evidence of Chinese soldiers operating the canal, the influence of Chinese companies in the area is enough to raise alarms in Washington. Panama's economic dependence on China is another factor fueling U.S. concerns. In 2017, Panama severed diplomatic ties with Taiwan in favor of Beijing, signaling a shift in allegiance. By 2023, China had become Panama's top export market, purchasing $1.3 billion worth of goods, primarily copper ore. At the same time, Panama imports $1.8 billion annually from China, a figure that rises to $11.2 billion when including goods passing through the Cologne Free Zone, one of the world's largest free trade zones. This economic reliance on China could sway Panama's political alignment in the event of a U.S.-China conflict, further complicating the situation. Trump's interest in the Panama Canal is rooted in both economic and strategic concerns. While a military invasion is unlikely, Trump has not ruled out the use of force. In a recent statement, he said, "I can't assure you on either military or economic coercion, but I can say this: we need the canal for economic security." diplomatic efforts would likely be Trump's first course of action. He may pressure Panama to abide by the 1977 treaty and reduce tolls. However, Panama's government has been clear that the canal's sovereignty is non-negotiable. If diplomacy fails, Trump could resort to economic measures, such as tariffs or sanctions. He might also block U.S. investments and exports to Panama, or even withdraw from the U.S.-Panama Trade Promotion Agreement of 2012. Another option is to back alternative trade routes to challenge the canal's dominance. For example, Nicaragua Canal, a project in Nicaragua, was nearly realized in 2014, backed by a Chinese investor. While the investor later withdrew, the project could be revived with U.S. support. Estimated costs exceed $50 billion, but it would offer a strategic alternative to the Panama Canal. Mexico's railway project. Mexico is developing a massive railway along the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, connecting ports on the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. The U.S. could back this initiative, introducing competition to the Panama Canal and potentially driving down its tolls. While unlikely, Trump has not ruled out the use of military force. Panama abolished its military after the 1989 U.S. invasion, leaving it reliant on civilian forces for security. If the U.S. deemed it necessary to secure the canal, it could likely achieve a swift victory, given Panama's lack of military capabilities. However, such an action would draw international condemnation and damage America's global reputation, making it a last resort. The Panama Canal remains a vital asset for global trade and U.S. national security. Trump's concerns about tolls and Chinese influence highlight its strategic importance. While military action seems improbable, Trump may use diplomatic and economic pressure to achieve his goals. However, Panama's growing ties with China and its firm stance on canal sovereignty pose significant challenges. As the situation evolves, the U.S. must carefully navigate its approach to balance economic interests, national security, and global reputation. And that's the latest on today's top stories. What are your thoughts? If you'd like to dive deeper into any of these topics or explore related issues, feel free to leave a comment. Thank you for tuning in and spending your time with us. Stay informed, stay curious, and we'll see you next time. Take care.